Welcome to That Boxing Writers Podcast, the weekly podcast show about boxing. I'm That Boxing Writer, Jeremy Harridges, and let's start the show. Hello, fight fans. I'm That Boxing Writer, Jeremy Harridges, and welcome to episode 10 of That Boxing Writers Podcast. Hey, episode 10, this is a huge week. This is Deontay Wilder, Tyson Fury 3 fight week. So that's going to be the focus for this episode. Make sure that you guys like, subscribe, however you're getting it. If you're watching it on my YouTube channel, make sure to stay engaged, see what's coming up, get those views up by liking it, and comment below on what you guys think. I think you're going to like this episode. So taking a look at Deontay Wilder, Tyson Fury 3, happening in just a couple days now, October 9th, Saturday, October 9th. Make sure to follow along with me on my socials, whether on probably Twitter is the best one, at @ABoxingWriter. And also make sure that you guys are paying attention to my work on fansided.com/boxing. I will be live on Press Row inside the T-Mobile Arena covering the fight for Fansided. I'm doing a live blog. I'm doing round by round for the main event, live results, a little bit of everything. Hopefully, maybe even early on Saturday, I can even get some interviews in and get a little bit of content out there too. Depends on who I run into and have contact with. But I'm getting out late to the party. Unfortunately, wish I could be there the entire week. Wasn't able to do it. Schedule conflicts and all that. But I will be there the day that it matters, fight day. So taking a look at this one, I kind of want to start off. I think it's an intriguing matchup. If you look at on matchmakers, right now, Deontay Wilder is about a 2-1 underdog, which is a lot closer than it would have been months ago. But the constant delays in this one is really given Wilder a big boost, I think. And I think Wilder's come off well during the press conferences so far. I think he's a live underdog. I'll give you guys my prediction in a bit. And then I also have a great show. I've got another writer on board with me today. That's Carlos Toro. I think he offers a great synopsis of what he sees. I really value his opinion, but we do a bit of a deep dive on Fury versus Wilder 3. And then I also have a fighter on. That's Diego Pacheco. He fights on October 16th on the Mikey Garcia undercard. So that's coming up next for next week. So we got a little bit of everything today, and we'll probably end with the interview. But let's talk Fury versus Wilder 3. You guys can go on fansided.com/boxing, see my official prediction, and I'll give that here in a bit. But first thing I wanted to talk about is I want to break down Deontay Wilder's top 5 knockouts of all time. Hey, Fury's a knockout artist too. He's got a good knockout career, but Deontay Wilder's a different cat when it comes to knockouts. His knockouts are the type that are highlight reel knockouts. So let's take a look at those top 5 knockouts. Number 5, I've got Luis Ortiz 2 fight with Deontay Wilder. Wilder had problems with Luis Ortiz in the first fight. The second fight, it took him a little while to get cooking in that one as well. However, once he found his mojo, it was bad for Luis Ortiz. Wilder proved all I need is that one punch. He was down on the scorecards. He wasn't winning the fight. And then boom, that right hand knocked Luis Ortiz senseless. He was flat on the ground, couldn't get his senses, didn't really beat the count, or at least when he got up to his feet, he was in no condition to continue fighting. It was over. One punch does it when you're Deontay Wilder, and Luis Ortiz felt that. One punch with the right hand, there you go. Number 4, Deontay Wilder versus Sergey Leakovich. That was a scary knockout. If you guys don't remember this one, again, it was a Wilder right hand, more to the side of the head, if I remember correctly. There was no getting up for Sergey Leakovich. When he went down, he was so out of it that he was like running, like in his sleep. It was a scary sight. You had to wonder about his condition. Whenever you see a fighter moving uncontrollably, you think seizure. Fortunately, that wasn't the case. It was just a really bad reaction to the knockout. His body was still trying to react, but his senses were gone. There was no way he was going to continue fighting. And that was a round 1 knockout. That was all the way back in 2013. Number 3, best knockout of Deontay Wilder's career. I've got Deontay Wilder versus Berman Stavern 2. The first fight went the distance. Deontay Wilder also broke his right hand in that fight early on. I want to say in round 3 or 4. He couldn't use that right hand anymore. whoa. The second time was a different story. Stavern never made it out of the first round. He was down 3 times, and each one looked bad. He was complaining about a punch to the back of his head. Everything was landing cleanly on the front of his face. Deontay Wilder smelled blood in the water, jumped all over him, landed a flurry of punches, hit him to the side of the head. That was it. Berman Stavern looked like an accordion, crumpled back on himself, became a meme, but it was a nasty knockout. My favorite part of that was when referee Mercanti Jr. has to jump on his back, and you just see him, trying to calm Wilder down, but he was so amped up that there wasn't a whole lot that he could do to hold Wilder back. I felt bad for Arthur Mercanti Jr. Wilder was actually in danger of getting disqualified, even though he knocked his opponent out cold, but he calmed down. Knockout was clean, over. Berman Stavern's never been right since the first Wilder fight. That second one didn't help. Number 2 best knockout of Deontay Wilder's career came against Dominic Breazeale. Again, another first round knockout. Breazeale and Wilder had a lot of harsh words for each other. Wilder backed it up, thumped Breazeale with that right hand once again. One shot, he flopped to the ground and he was out. He actually regained his senses and tried to make it back up. But when you get punched like that, there is no making it back up. And it was as violent a fall that you're going to see from a fighter after getting knocked out. And finally, number 1 best knockout of Deontay Wilder's career, I would have to say that came in 2016 against Artur Szpilka. Szpilka was boxing well. Southpaw was really looking good in the fight. And round 9, he tried to jump in. Deontay Wilder timed him perfectly, gave that short right to his jaw. The momentum of Szpilka coming forward, the power of Deontay Wilder's fist colliding with his jaw. Szpilka, not the biggest heavyweight, but it's still a big, solid dude, spun around like a top, back flat against the canvas, unconscious. Deontay Wilder said it numerous times. He thought he killed Artur Szpilka, and for a second it looked like it. Thankfully, Szpilka was okay. Again, never really recovered from that fight. Hasn't gone on to great things since. And you have to wonder, is Deontay Wilder's right hand so brutal, not just because of how violently it knocks people out, but also because of the damage that it does to a fighter after the fact? Because so far, none of their careers have really gone on to do anything. Now, with all that being said, Deontay Wilder's round 12 knockdown of Fury could have been on this list, but Fury's abilities to recover kept him from getting put on that list. That fight finished to the draw. That was the first time around, and of course, Deontay looked bad the second time around. With all that being said, those are the top 5 knockouts of Deontay Wilder's career. Will he put Fury on that list the third time around? Who knows? You have to watch on October 9th on Fox and ESPN pay-per-view. I will be at the fight. Follow along with me. I can't wait. I'll be getting that in late Friday night. So all my coverage is really going to be coming Saturday, but check it out. I'm excited about it. If you're going to be in Vegas, hit me up. Leave me a comment below. Hey, I like to have a good time in Vegas. Always looking for new friends. Hit me up. All right. So that's what we got there. Going further into this, I had a very good conversation with someone that I've known for a while on social media. It was actually our first time talking, having a real conversation face to face, even though it was via Zoom. Was still a great talk. That person is Carlos Toro. He's a longtime writer for Fightful. He also covers wrestling occasionally for Fightful. He also has his own stuff that he does. You can look him up, Carlos Toro Media. He has his own YouTube page, Carlos Toro Media. Great guy. One of the real good guys of boxing. Here's my talk about Fury Wilder 3 with Carlos Toro. Hello, fight fans. I'm that boxing writer, Jeremy Harridges, here with special guest Carlos Toro. Carlos, thank you so much for joining me today.
Jeremy, it's a pleasure to be here and talking to boxing with you, man. How are you doing?
Good. You know, it's funny. We've conversed on social media for a couple of years now, but this is the first time we've actually sat down and have a conversation.
Years and years of being together on conference calls, sometimes one following the other. And this is the first time that we actually have spoken face to face like this.
Well, and it's funny because during the pandemic, it was you and me on pretty much every single Zoom call. And so we were kind of like the regulars, and it would be us asking questions. And that's kind of like how we had our get together. So it's nice to have a little time where we can sit down and talk without having to do the whole interview thing.
Yeah, it's a nice change of pace, to say the least.
So here's something interesting. I always like to start off by getting a little bit of background information on the writers and different guests that I have on. Something that both you and I have in common is Puerto Rican ancestry. I'm half Puerto Rican, and correct me if I'm wrong. Were you born and raised in Puerto Rico?
Yep. Born and raised in Puerto Rico, and pretty much was raised there by full-blooded Puerto Rican family my entire life.
Where in Puerto Rico are you from?
So I was born in Mayagüez, which, for those of you who don't know, it's like the western, can I say, quote unquote, capital, but it's like the most famous town on the western side of the island. And I was pretty much born and raised right around the western, southwesternmost part of the island. I was not born and raised in a traditionally big area, and I could not have been born farther from the metropolitan area, more touristy sites of the island. I pretty much spent most of my life like in small, very rural countryside, like fishing towns. That's like you if you didn't know any better, sometimes you could, on a not bad day, you might even think it's like a third world country almost.
Well, it's funny you said that, because my family originated from Isabela. So
okay, that's actually that's not that far. That's not that far from where I live. It's like maybe an hour.
Yeah, and I still have like great aunts and uncles who I've never met, cousins that are still there. And only time I've actually been to Puerto Rico was for my honeymoon, and obviously we were more in the San Juan area. But and I got to get back sometime and meet the relatives that I've never met before.
I'm sort of in the inverse, where I have plenty of family in Chicago, and and I've only been to Chicago twice. One when I was a literal baby, and like just gonna give it a bit of a time frame. That was like towards the end of the Chicago Bulls' second three-peat. I remember absolutely nothing of that trip. And the other trip was senior year of college, only to accompany my dad because he was doing the Chicago Marathon. But aside from that, never met my family from Chicago, so it's sort of the inverse situation with me.
That's so funny. And then I mean, like, you're close now. I mean, you're in the Midwest in Cleveland now.
Yeah. And wasn't expecting to be living here, but here I am.
Well, as far as like the culture of boxing in Puerto Rico, I'm assuming that you got into it because it was something that everybody was into and it was a family thing.
Yeah. My dad was a huge boxing fan. He was a big sports fan in general, which is how I started loving, baseball, basketball, football, and it kind of evolved into me loving a bunch of other sports, boxing included. I remember when I was a kid, just watching, sort of the latter half of Tito Trinidad's career, Evan Calderon's career, and I kind of started to really develop boxing memories kind of right around when Miguel Cotto was starting his various world title runs. I think I remember the most vivid memories, not necessarily my first memory, but my most vivid memory, earliest memory of Cotto was the Zab Judah fight, which, I mean, I don't know if people remember, but that was a bit of an underrated fight. It was a really good one to sort of look back upon. It was, I still sometimes occasionally watch that fight. It was a pretty darn good one.
And that's quite an icon to have. I mean, he's such an amazing boxer. And so when you decide that, hey, I'm going to be a journalist, how did you kind of venture from Puerto Rico to the United States? What was your story for how you got into journalism, actually?
So I've always been a fan of writing. So for the longest time, if I wasn't going to have a career playing sports, because my first dream was to become a pro soccer player, and that didn't exactly work out. So the other one was I wanted to get into writing, and right around high school I started to develop a love of writing and kind of weaving in sports just from reading stuff like Bill Simmons and Rick Riley's columns on ESPN and the other various platforms and that kind of stuff. And I thought, okay, but what if I try to go to a school in the US where I can try to get a journalism degree and maybe play soccer? And I chose then a little known university in New Jersey called Rider. And the soccer thing didn't work out. So I basically kind of dedicated my full time doing sports journalism. And that was kind of basically what I wanted to, study. And I did a journalism degree with a bunch of focus on different sports media, hosted a radio show, was a radio broadcaster for the Riders baseball team. It was a tremendous experience. And I even got to spend a few years covering the Yankees AA team in Trenton, New Jersey as a beat writer for like 3 years. And when I got into boxing, it was basically like a wrestling reporter named Sean Rossap. He was building a website, and right in the middle of me interviewing for a wrestling podcast that I did, literally right out of nowhere, just because I wanted to talk to him, I saw on his Twitter while I was talking to him on the phone that he was looking for boxing writers. And I'm thinking, I mean, I love boxing. I've never written about boxing, but I might as well shoot my shot. And it kind of started an upwards path towards me being in boxing writing, which I believe that was in, I want to say summer of 2016. It was like a month before the first Carl Frampton Leo Santa Cruz fight. If you remember that classic from the Barclays Center, it was like a month before that. That's when I started boxing writing.
Got you. And I love your work. I've been reading your stuff at Fightful and then Fight Game Media. You've got your podcast going on there. Always. And here's the other thing too, your work with wrestling. I kind of given wrestling a break, but you and Steve Muehlhausen, the stuff that I've read from the two of you guys, it got me back into wrestling again. So thank you for that.
I appreciate it.
So now here we are. It's finally here. We've been waiting a long time for Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder 3. There were questions if we were ever going to get this fight. Do you feel that after all the time that's been, gapped in there in between the second and the third fights, has that time helped this percolate, or did it hurt the marketability of this fight, in your opinion?
It's tough. I mean, I would say, right now, maybe hurt it a little bit. I think that the fact that the fight got called off, from a few months ago after, Tyson tested positive with COVID-19, regardless of whether people actually believe that or not, that's a separate story. But I mean, I think that, this summer with all the hoopla regarding the arbitration and all the negotiation between Fury and Anthony Joshua that kind of went through, it kind of felt like, all right, let's just get to the third fight between Wilder and Fury. And I think people were genuinely excited, but once that kind of just got postponed for a few months, it just kind of felt like it was another case of the air just kind of left, the wind just kind of went off the sails of that fight. Because it's not the first time that this fight got postponed. I mean, we were supposed to have an immediate rematch last year, just a few months after Fury beat Wilder in the second fight. So, I think that, the people who were excited all the way back then, even for the initial third fight from last year, I think that they're still excited for this one. But I do have to admit, there is a part of me that feels like the non-hardcore, non-boxing fans who will only tune into like the biggest fight, that's kind of feel like that energy has kind of gone down just a little bit. I think it'll ultimately still be a big event, but I mean, I think it definitely would have helped if this took place a few months ago.
Which I think is so ironic, considering the fact that, like if COVID didn't happen and this fight happened way back then, you have to think that, okay, Fury just had his way with Wilder. This is now a 70-30 fight. Fury's going to dominate it. All the added time, all the different videos and all the things that Deontay Wilder's been doing, Malik Scott, it really feels like a 50-50 fight again. At least to me, it kind of feels that way.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. In fact, I probably would have gone back then if the immediate rematch had happened. I probably would have gone as far to say 80-20 for Fury in that one, in my opinion. But now I do think that the time between fights has definitely helped Wilder sort of refocus a little bit on a mental side. And look, when you're working with a new trainer, and I know Malik Scott is not necessarily new, but he's, this is the first time Malik Scott is the head guy, no longer just under, Mark Breland and those other guys. That I think that will definitely help Deontay Wilder. And you can kind of just sense it when Malik and Deontay are together, that there is sort of an air of calmness and I dare I say, maybe more confidence with Wilder, because it does feel like he has someone who, chemistry wise, he can connect with very, very well. And we've seen this time and time again. Sometimes it's not necessarily that Malik Scott is a better trainer than Mark Breland, or so-and-so trainer is better than a fighter's previous trainer, but sometimes that connection and that chemistry, it does kind of allow the fighters maybe to be able to experiment a little bit more, fine-tune some things. And ultimately, I don't think there's anything Malik Scott can do that can fundamentally change Deontay Wilder as a boxer. What we see is what we get. We already know the kind of boxer and the kind of brawler that he is, but Wilder doesn't necessarily need to be a completely different fighter to win this fight. I do think that I think he mentally, he's a lot more prepared. I do think that, fine-tuning a couple of things here and there. I do think from a boxing standpoint, there's a chance that Wilder could still knock out Tyson Fury. And I do think that's the only way Wilder can win, because I don't think Malik Scott can change and improve Wilder to such a degree where he will now just outbox Tyson Fury to the point where he's easily winning 10-9 rounds. I mean, go back and watch, the 18 rounds that have been scored in this fight, in this rivalry, I should say. Mm-hmm. You can only say maybe 3 or 4 were actually really scored for Wilder. And I'm including the 2 where Wilder dropped Tyson Fury. So I'm not saying that Wilder has no chance, but I do think that if Wilder wins, it's going to have to be with a stoppage or a knockout.
And I think you said a lot there. Thinking about Malik Scott, right? I mean, obviously he's coming at this from a very scientific perspective. And as far as skill building at 35 years old, I mean, to try to get a boxer to kind of undo things that he's so used to doing or things that he never picked up, it certainly seems like that's almost like an impossible task.
On paper it does, but I mean, if you look back sort of that second fight, those first 3 rounds before Fury kind of busted up Deontay Wilder's eardrum with that right hook, and Wilder was just kind of out of it for the remainder of the fight, there were some things that I thought that you can still unlearn a little bit, and you can really focus a lot. One thing that I looked at that rematch that really stood out to me was the fact that Deontay Wilder didn't do a good enough of a job establishing the left jab. You saw it in those first couple of rounds. Wilder was throwing a bit of a lazy jab, and it was abundantly clear that Tyson Fury was not respecting that jab. And he knew very well how dangerous that right hand can be. But Fury's head movement is so good, and his athleticism is so underrated that, if you can only focus on the right hook, on the right hand, because that left jab isn't really doing anything, then Tyson Fury will have a much better chance of telegraphing and knowing when to avoid the right hand. And the one thing that I've noticed is that whenever in that rematch, when Wilder threw that right hand, more often than not, it was set up by a good, sharp left jab upstairs or sometimes to the body. And I do think that's the kind of things that Malik Scott, should and could help Deontay Wilder sort of work upon. And I think with someone like Malik Scott, I think Deontay Wilder is more open to listening to. I mean, it's clear that the chemistry between Wilder and Mark Breland wasn't exactly great. So it's possible that Breland was trying to tell Deontay Wilder these things, but because Wilder and Breland sometimes were not on the same page, that it just didn't necessarily click. With Malik, I think there's a greater chance of that happening. And I think the left jab from Deontay Wilder is going to be key, especially when it comes to establishing that right hand that he has.
Well, losing a fight can certainly wake a person up to critiques and criticism, and now they can absorb it. I know that Mark Breland became the scapegoat, and Mark Breland fired back saying, "Hey, I tried to teach him certain things, but he didn't want to listen to me." Well, he's listening to Malik Scott now. As far as like the little vignettes, the training videos that have been then purposely put out there by Team Wilder, we see, as you said, the left hand has been key. Establishing the jab, also working the body, and then the footwork. Those are 3 things that do appear, at least from the training footage, to have improved from Wilder. Are you seeing the same thing there?
Yeah, to a certain extent, yeah. But obviously they're kind of small snippets that we see on social media. So it's really, really hard to sort of make a full evaluation, full scouting report on how much better has Deontay Wilder improved. But I do see a lot of promise there. I do see that Deontay Wilder is focused more, not necessarily on the right hand. We all know that's, that thing can knock anyone out in an instant. But the other facets of its boxing, the footwork, the athleticism, moving around the ring, not necessarily having to fight while moving back, which was another thing that Wilder struggled with in that rematch. And of course, the left hand. I think that those are things that I'm seeing that are a little sharper than it was in the rematch. And people might not think about it, but I think those are the kinds of tools and elements that even with just a slight improvement, they can go a long way. Because now that's something that Tyson Fury is going to have to maybe put a little more attention to. And if his full attention isn't on that right hand, then it opens up the possibility where Deontay Wilder could, in fact, land that right hand, which is still a very, very dangerous weapon if Tyson Fury is not careful.
As far as now, here we are. Again, a closer fight where it gets a little bit of more intrigue. It looks more competitive. Mm-hmm. You got the sense that before Tyson Fury got COVID, that there were some questions about his physical conditioning. Mm-hmm. He shuts up for, 8 weeks, doesn't do anything until we see him in the press conference. Do you feel like there was a sense of urgency? Like, hey, I've got 8 weeks now. I got to really put it together better than I was doing before.
To an extent, yes, but we all know Tyson Fury is going to Tyson Fury. And I think that there is a part of me that does feel like Fury is not overly concerned with being a significantly better fighter than he was in the rematch, because I feel like the Tyson Fury kind of believes that he's got everything figured out and there's nothing that Deontay Wilder can do or that Malik Scott can improve upon that will make this a much more different fight than it was in the rematch. I think ultimately for all the talk that Tyson Fury likes to draw, I think that he will still be, he'll be in the same mentality, the same shape that he was, and the same level of readiness that he was in the rematch. But I don't feel like there's that much of an urgency to be, okay, I got to be like I was around here for the rematch. Now I got to be up here for this third fight. Because as I mentioned, I don't think there's anything Deontay Wilder can do fundamentally that's different that's going to allow him to start outboxing Tyson Fury. And I think to that extent, Fury believes, I just got to watch out for the right hand, and that's it. And if I do that, my natural boxing ability will overtake and win rounds in this fight. So either I'm going to stop him, or I'm going to let my boxing ability and my boxing acumen to win rounds and get into a decision, so long as I avoid the right hand and get knocked down.
I'm going to ask you for a prediction in a second, but as far as, and I kind of find this interesting, seeing Deontay Wilder in the weight room, especially on the bench press. And a lot of people say, well, why isn't he squatting? But on the bench press, he's putting up 350. He already had fantastic power before. I don't think anyone feels that bench pressing is really going to increase your punching power. What do you think is the rationale for why he was doing all the upper body heavy lifting? Was it to pack on a little bit more meat to contend with a guy that's that much bigger? What's your insight on that one?
It's so hard to really get a gauge for anyone's mentality for doing stuff like that, because every fighter, every person is different when it comes to that. But I think there are two reasons. One, I do think that to an extent, Wilder might want to pack on just a little bit more meat, a little bit more pounds to his frame, because one thing that was also abundantly clear in the rematch is that Tyson Fury, his overall frame and him being so much heavier than Deontay Wilder, it did kind of take a little bit out of Wilder physically. And that's something that I don't think Wilder really considered when you look back from the first fight. Because in the second fight, Fury was a lot more physical and was a lot more in your face compared to the first one. So I think that Wilder does kind of want to sort of even the odds, even if it's just a little bit, if he can somehow manage to hold off just a little bit of Tyson Fury's, heaviness and frame and body just a little bit, then I think that will certainly help. But I think at the same time, sometimes, we're all creatures of habit, and we all want to, continue our regimen and want to be able to show that we can still do what we've been able to do this whole time. And then I think a lot of it has to do with, Wilder is experiencing a stage in his career that he has never experienced before. So I think he also wants to prove to himself and to prove to everyone out there that this is still the same Deontay Wilder that's been knocking out guys in short order, that knocked out Dominic Brazil, that, in one round, that completely demolished Berman Stavern in their rematch. I think that Wilder wants to prove, even before the fight, that he's still that same guy, that he's still going for that same habit, the same training regimen, and the same, and proving that he still have the same level of strength to sort of, silence any doubters. And I do think that's something that Wilder does pride himself in doing. It's partially why we got the second Luis Ortiz rematch, because Wilder feels that there were some people that doubted sort of the way that the first fight went through. And by beating Luis Ortiz kind of in the similar fashion that he did in the first fight, that he silenced those doubters.
So I know in a little bit, I'm going to have to write my prediction piece for Fansided, and I'm still wrestling with this in my mind. I'm having a hard time with this one, because there has been so much time that's been drifting in between the second and the third fight. And the other one is that fight number 1 and fight number 2 were so different. I can't lose sight of the fact that Deontay Wilder almost knocked out Tyson Fury. He almost did it. I asked Tyson Fury, I remember back shortly after that fight, it was right before the Otto Wallin fight. I asked him, how hurt were you? And he said, I don't remember it. So that kind of told me everything I needed to know. Like, he doesn't even know how he got through it. Then the second one, he was so dominant. I'm having a hard time kind of putting some substance in the middle. Where are you going with this one?
Believe me, I've been in the same position as you. I've been struggling a lot for the last few months. Ultimately, I think I'm going to go with Wilder by a late stoppage, and here's why. We've seen Wilder get outboxed many, many times throughout his career. As far as winning rounds in the traditional sense, but Wilder's not exactly a true elite heavyweight in that regard. But every time out, he's been able to sort of bounce back and knock the other guy out. He's done it twice with Luis Ortiz. He almost did it with Deontay Wilder once. And one thing to consider, the 4th through 7th rounds of that rematch, it's pretty much due to that right hand that pretty much, busted up Deontay Wilder's eardrum and left him without any balance whatsoever for the remainder of that fight. That's not necessarily something that's common. That's not something that happens on a regular basis. So I think that with Malik Scott helping him and fine-tuning a couple of things here and there, I do believe that we're going to get perhaps something closer to the first fight, where Fury is going to be outboxing Deontay Wilder. But I think ultimately, I think that right hand is going to find its way home. And one thing that's also to consider is, Fury, this will be his first fight coming off of COVID. And it wasn't that long ago. It's only been 3 months, maybe not even 3 months that reports came out that he tested positive for COVID. And even though every fighter and every athlete is different in terms of their response to COVID, but there's been a track record of fighters who don't fight that well in their first fight coming off of COVID. Jamel Herring, wasn't really 100% in his fight against Jonathan Okendo. Artur Beterbiev, whether you attribute that to COVID or the injuries or the long layoff, he didn't look that great in his first fight back. Alexander Povetkin looked like he aged like 20 years in between the first Dillian White fight and in the second. There is a precedence of fighters not doing that well or not performing at 100% in their first fight since COVID. So I think all of that combined, I'm going with a Deontay Wilder late stoppage, but I don't feel confident. I mean, I'm not going to feel confident at all with any pick. I do think that this fight can go so many different ways. I mean, Wilder could win. Wilder could knock Tyson Fury out. Fury could knock Deontay Wilder out. Fury could win to a long 12th round decision. There's so many different ways this fight can go, but ultimately I think it's going to make for a dramatic fight because we just don't know what exactly is going to happen.
And you and I agree 100% on that one. There's so many different ways that it can go. You gave me something to think about there. Last question I'm going to hit you with. If Deontay Wilder wins, is he now then, if that occurred, would he then be the best heavyweight in the world?
No. I think if Wilder beats Fury, I think I'd have to sort of see how the fight goes. But I think my immediate reaction, knowing myself, probably would go Usyk number one, because I think stylistically he matches up a lot better with Deontay Wilder, because Usyk just knows how to negate a fighter's biggest strength. We've seen that a number of times, and Wilder would not be the first time that Usyk would face a guy whose biggest weapon is his power. And he's done that and he's performed against those type of fighters admirably. So it would be Usyk 1, Wilder 2, Fury 3, and Anthony Joshua 4. I think that would be my immediate top 4 at heavyweight.
Well, there is a lot riding on this fight, and it could completely change the scope of the heavyweight division as far as that top 4 is concerned. But I don't think, regardless, anyone's going to argue too much with those top 4. There just seems like a definitive line between them and everybody else.
Yeah. That's it almost kind of seems it's been that case, with the exception of Andy Ruiz, when he beat Joshua, and now Usyk kind of entered the fray. But yeah, I mean, it's funny, ever since Tyson Fury came back, it's always been Fury, Wilder, and Joshua kind of in that top 3. Now Usyk at number 4, and look like he's going to be staying there for a while. It does feel like they are in a heavyweight class of their own, while everybody else is sort of in that B minus range, maybe B plus at best. Well, that top 4 is at an A plus level.
Hopefully this fight gives us a little bit more clarity, or it's leading to more clarity. I know everybody's been waiting for an undisputed champion. I'm just hoping that this is the next step towards that.
Yes, me too. It's regardless who wins, it's going to be a long negotiation road between Usyk and whether it be Wilder's camp or Fury's camp. But, and again, got to consider, if the Usyk Joshua rematch takes place anytime, within the next 6 months or so, you also going to have to consider that.
For sure. And hopefully we never hear the word arbitration involved in the heavyweight division again. Carlos, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I love the pick, and I've loved having you on.
Yeah, Jeremy, it was a pleasure talking to boxing with you. It's a pleasure being here. It also was a great pleasure finally talking to you for the first time that isn't us connecting to a common Zoom link to cover a fight or a press conference.
100%. And I look forward to when we get to do it again.
Same here.
That was my guy, Carlos Toro. He's taking Wilder for the late stoppage. There are numerous people that are coming out with that position, and I thought that all of Carlos's positions were valid. I could see it happening. Do I think it's going to happen? I just can't go there right now. Considering that I was ringside watching Fury and Wilder the second time around, I just can't pick against Fury. In that fight, I picked Wilder to win by late stoppage. That did not happen. Instead, Fury stops him in round 7, and the rest is history. So I do agree that anything can happen when these two come together. And then you have to count the first fight. Deontay Wilder knocked Fury down twice and almost had him out in that 12th round. A new and improved Wilder could make that happen again. So there's a very good chance, I think, that Carlos's prediction comes true. And thank you again, Carlos, for coming on. Great guy, Carlos Toro Media. Check him out. I just can't bet against Fury. I can't do it. And this is a hard fight to handicap. I don't suggest that anyone goes out and bets this one. I think it's too hard to do. There's too many ifs in it. We haven't seen these guys in over a year. That always causes some concern with me. However, I am going to go with an improved Wilder, lasts longer than he did the second time around. I think it goes the distance. We've seen them go the distance before. I think both of them have gotten better. Fury's never going to look like the Body Beautiful. That's not who he is. But he's always going to bring his best, I think. We've never looked at him in the ring and said, wow, he looks, well, I was going to say that. There was a couple early on. He didn't look great. In his first few comeback fights, he was still getting into shape. He doesn't have that problem anymore. I think he's in shape for Tyson Fury. And I think it's deceiving to see his body type and then to see how he performs in the ring. So I thought that looking at him last time, there's no way Deontay Wilder is going to mop the floor with this guy. Don't judge a book by its cover. I say that Fury wins this one by unanimous decision. You can read my full write-up on fansided.com/boxing. Check it out. So last but not least, non-Fury Wilder 3 related, I had the opportunity to talk to a young super middleweight, and that is Diego Pacheco. He's undefeated, great guy. Had a really good talk with him. He's 6'4" and a super middleweight, 12-0, 9 KOs. He's fighting on October 16th, so next week, against Lucas de Abreu, fellow undefeated super middleweight. I have the feeling that Pacheco is going to take this one. And so I sat down, talked with him, very good amateur background. We did a nice little deep dive in just about 10 minutes that we had to talk. But a guy that I think is going to open your eyes. He's only 20 years old. I'm hopefully bringing you a future superstar here. And I'm always on the lookout for future talent. I think Diego Pacheco is one of those guys. Here's my talk with Diego Pacheco. Diego, thank you for taking the time. How are you doing today?
I'm good, bro. How are you, man?
Good, good. I'm very interested in hear your backstory. I know that a lot of boxers have kind of like an origin story, that moment that got them into the sport of boxing. How did you find your way into boxing?
My dad actually put me in a boxing gym when I was 9 years old. He took me to a gym that was in my neighborhood and signed me up. And for like the first few months, the coaches there, they can notice something in me. They could tell I was special. And yeah, bro, ever since I started, I've never stopped. It's just always been boxing.
What was, a lot of times when people are trying to train and do certain things, boxing usually isn't the first avenue. What made boxing the go-to thing for you to do? Like, what was the rationale behind that?
Yeah, well, honestly, bro, my dad, before boxing, I played soccer, I played football, I played baseball, basketball. I did every sport. And then once I got into boxing, I like stopped playing every sport. It was just boxing for me completely. And honestly, before I started boxing, I wasn't really like a boxing fan or anything like that. And then after I started boxing, it was just like, that's all I would want to watch, boxing. And that's all I wanted to do is just box. So it's like I found my passion and I just never stopped, kept going with it.
So when you're a young guy, you're getting into it. Who are the boxers that you kind of looked up to, or who are the ones that you focused on or loved to really watch when you were kind of coming up the ranks?
Yeah, honestly, one of the first guys that I would watch and I always remember is Juan Manuel Marquez. When I was really young, I wasn't really into watching boxing too much. And when I did get into it, it was Juan Manuel Marquez. So I would love to watch, maybe because my dad loved him so much and my mom and everyone. So yeah, it's just him. He's one of the guys.
As you're training and you're kind of going through it, it takes a special kind of person to want to focus on boxing. Hitting people and getting hit in the face doesn't always appeal to a lot of different people. What was your moment that you realized, you know what, this is for me, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life?
Yeah, honestly, man, I would have so much fun boxing people with my height and just beating people up, that it was just like, man, like this is what I'm gonna do. And every day I just wanted to get better and better. So it was just like I knew this is what I wanted to do from a very long time.
So make sure I got this right. So I read that you had about 75 amateur bouts total and 8 national titles.
Yeah.
Talk about that first national title. What was that experience like for you?
Yeah, I've always been a super big kid. So I remember I was about 12 and all the 12-year-olds were like 100 pounds, 90 pounds. And I was the only 12-year-old that was like 130 already. So I would go to tournaments and I wouldn't get no fights. There would be nobody my weight. So I'd go straight to nationals. And my first tournament, I only had like 6 amateur fights. And I went to the nationals and I fought all these guys who were already national champions and I beat them all. I beat them. So I won that first national title. And that's when I'm like, man, like I'm doing it for real. And then I just kept going to tournaments and I would win tournaments back to back with a few fights. And yeah, that's how it went, bro. Just beating everybody up, and I got the respect from all these fighters right away. And yeah, it's an amazing journey, bro, being an amateur and then turning pro.
I was going to say, because with 75 amateur fights, I mean, that's a good base, but to have 8 national titles in 75 amateur fights, that's got to be like way up there. I don't think I've heard too many times that people have done that.
Yeah. Actually, a lot of guys have way more fights, like over 100 fights and stuff. Yeah, out of those 75, I only lost 6.
Wow.
And they were most, like, all of them are split decisions, like really close fights, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I always left it all in the ring, and yeah.
As far as your knockout power, obviously, you have a good knockout rating. You have good power. You've got the size. Is that something that you've noticed as you've gotten older, that it's gotten better, or is it something that you've always had?
It's kind of like, I remember when I first knocked somebody out cold, and as a pro, it was kind of new to me because I had never knocked anyone out like that. Every time I did stop somebody, it was with body shots.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to go to the body. So every time I got a TKO, it would be with body shots. So I guess once that headgear came off and those 10 ounces were put on my hands, it was just different. Putting these guys to sleep and stuff, you know. I
know that with a lot of taller fighters, body shots always aren't a priority. How did you kind of learn to prioritize that? Is that something that your trainer instilled in you, or is that something that that you just kind of naturally gravitated towards?
Honestly, I think I just naturally loved hurting people to the body. Once I got a little taste of how effective hitting the body was, I just wanted to keep doing it. I just wanted to keep hurting people to the body and keep hitting them to that left hook to the liver. And it's just something that I practiced a lot on my own on the heavy bag and during sparring and stuff. And I kind of mastered it. But like you said, a lot of Thai guys don't really go to the body too much. And as a pro, I see why people say that, you know, because it's really dangerous. You could get caught trying to go down to the body when you're really tall. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I still haven't really showcase my body work as a pro, but I think slowly people will see it. You were talking about how through the amateurs you were always kind of a bigger body individual. Did you always have that height as well? Yeah, I've always been the tall guy. I've been the tallest kid in the class and stuff. Yeah. Is it hard at this point? I mean, super middleweight, I mean, you have a big frame. Is it hard to stay in that realm, or is it pretty easy to make weight still? Honestly, bro, it's pretty easy for me. I'm walking around like 173, 172. Yeah, that's the highest I've been these past few weeks, 173. Checked my weight this morning, I was 170. That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I'm a whole week out, you know. You've been talking about that as far as the training goes. I saw that you've been in the gym with some amazing fighters, getting in work with Gabe Rosado, David Benavidez. How did you kind of get connected with them, and what has that experience been like working with them? I actually been working with them for a while now. David, the first time I was in camp with him, he personally DM'd me and invited me to be in his camp. Was last year during the pandemic. He invited me over, and I was staying with him at his house and training with him down there for 6 weeks. And then with Gabriel Rosado's through Wildcard, the people down at Wildcard are really good friends of mine. They really love me, so they always invite me down there to work with their guys. So yeah, honestly, bro, I get sparring with Sturdo here with all these great fighters that want to work with me as well because they see my talent and stuff, you know. How much confidence does that give you when you can go in there with, you know, like a world champion, David Benavidez type, and you get that kind of work? Like, does that just give you like, hey, I can hang with these champs. Like, this is the type of talent I am. Yeah, hell yeah, bro. And then the feedback they give me too, you know, they tell me all the great things I do, and then they tell me the bad things, and they help me correct my mistakes, which is also a great, you know, like you said, it really, my confidence really goes super high because I know my opponents aren't going to be as good as these guys that I'm sparring, you know, and getting this work with. So yeah. Definitely confidence. A couple questions for you, and I'll let you go here. Lucas De Abreu, undefeated, 91% KO rating, tough guy. There's also a significant size disadvantage there for him. He's like 5'9.5", you're 6'4".
When you're
Yeah.
fighting a guy that's that much shorter, is it more difficult than fighting a guy that's a little bit taller?
It has its pros and cons. You know, I like fighting guys my height because I can go down to the body a lot easier. But I have no problem fighting shorter guys either. I could just establish my jab and keep that jab out there all night and control the fight and really just break them down to the point where I could get them out of there, you know, with my and my boxing skills. Yeah, fight either it's short guys, tall guys, doesn't matter, man. I'll get them out of there.
On paper, he looks like a very strong opponent, and he's a strong fighter. Would you say that the real big advantage, not just obviously the size advantage, but is it the experience advantage? The fact that you've had such a in-depth amateur career, and then also you fought better fighters during your professional career. Is that where you see the difference between the two of you right now?
Yeah, exactly. Like he's good enough to beat the guys that he's beaten, but I've seen a few tapes on him, and he looks really good on paper. He's had a lot of amateur fights, but yeah, I don't really see him bringing anything that'll phase me. You know, I think I'd be able to handle him pretty easy. I've had an amazing camp, and I know I'm ready for whatever he has to bring.
Well, Diego, I'm certainly looking forward to this fight. It's definitely a high caliber bout, and whenever you're in the ring, it's always something fun's going to happen. So thank you so much for taking the time, and best of luck come October 16th.
Thank you so much, bro. I appreciate it, man.
Thank you again for Diego to jump on the pod with me. I'm also going to have a write-up on fansided.com/boxing, offering a bit more insight into his opponent, Lucas de Abreu. Diego, telling you, 6'4", super middleweight. He's got some real punching power. Check him out. I think you'll like it. He's going to be on the undercard of the Mikey Garcia fight, which is going to be next week, next Saturday, October 16th. I believe that one's on DAZN. Check it out. All right. So that's what we got. Let me know. Who do you think is going to win Fury Wilder 3? Give me comments, questions, whatever you guys have. Hit me up. Leave them below. And that's it for me. Hopefully you guys follow along with me in Vegas. I'm going to be taking off tomorrow. I won't be getting in there till late, but I will be there. I'll be inside the arena. I'll be covering it with the press. Hey, I'm looking forward to this one. It's my first fight back throughout the entire pandemic. I have not gone to a boxing fight since, ironically, Fury versus Wilder 2. We'll see how this one goes. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, follow. I'll see you next time.